Hi, this is Howard Tiersky, CEO of Moving Interactive, with another installment in our Digital Innovation Series. Today's topic is driving business growth through customer behavior modeling. What is the single most impactful factor you can change to make your business grow and increase your profitability? It probably involves influencing human behavior. For example, if you could succeed in influencing your employees to be more motivated to serve customers, your customers to buy more frequently, your suppliers to extend more credit, your retailers to more aggressively sell your product, your shareholders to hold their stock, your business would benefit. In fact, the vast majority of all business value is created by influencing human behavior. Customer behavioral modeling, CBM, is a methodology we use at Moving Interactive to support teams that are defining and prioritizing the characteristics of products or marketing programs so that the investment in creating those experiences is optimized and the behavioral results are maximized. The CBM process is comprised of 3 steps. Step 1, define the customer behaviors that create value for your business and their typical sequences. If you want to influence certain behaviors to generate value, you must first know which of the customer behaviors actually generate value. Take some time to think about your customers, their behavior, and which specific behavior generates value. As a starting point, we like to think of the 7 big categories of customer value, but in your organization, there may be others. Number 1, new customer acquisition. Number 2, upsell or cross-sell. Number 3, retention of customers. Number 4, driving greater frequency of customer purchases. Number 5, service optimization, getting customers to connect with you for service reasons in the most optimal channel, which very often means the web. 6, advocacy, getting your customers to remarket your products or services to their friends, to basically tell their friends about you. And lastly, number 7, to enhance your IP. That would be doing things like getting your customers to write reviews or provide other kinds of intellectual property, submit videos to a site such as YouTube, or do other things which give you more intellectual property to sell or help market your products. Now, your industry or company may have others, of course, but for most businesses, this is a good starting point. So in this first step of customer behavior modeling, we use this as a starting point and try to determine what are all the key drivers of value, behaviors that drive value. And you may also find it helpful to think about, are there any behaviors which reduce value and things that are undesirable that we want to discourage or we want to encourage customers to avoid in their behavior? After you know all the behaviors that create and potentially reduce value, then we look at the behavioral sequence that leads to these behaviors. For example, before creating value by purchasing, a customer might first read a brochure you mailed them, then call your call center for more information. It could also be the case that there is more than one value-creating behavior in a chain. For example, customers first purchase and use a product regularly, and then they reorder the product. So once we understand the chain of value-generating behaviors, then we want to move on to step 2. Identify the different types of customers you have and what motivates the desired behaviors of each type of customer. If you were a travel agent trying to offer a great deal on a trip to New York City, it would be helpful to know that the customer you're selling to loves the arts but couldn't possibly care less about dining selection or sports, or vice versa. Knowing that information would inform which aspects of the New York City trip you want to emphasize and which you would gloss over as being irrelevant to your chances of making this sale. If you want to influence someone's behavior, it's enormously helpful to know something about them. So how well do you know your customers? What are their goals? What are their fears? What unmet needs do they have in their life? Have they ever heard of you? What do they think of you? Why do they buy your products? Why do they not buy your products? When looking to identify the different types of customers that you have, getting answers to these questions can seem like quite a daunting task because the answers can potentially be different for each individual. But customers are more alike than we think they are. Customers are like snowflakes in 2 respects. First, like snowflakes, they are all unique. And second, like snowflakes, many are extremely similar. Through customer behavioral modeling, we create models of our customer segments that can then be used to optimize our offerings and sales tactics for the different primary customer types. Now, there are 2 parts to the modeling of customers: defining customer categories and then defining customer dimensions. Let's look at the customer categories first, which is the simpler of the 2. Here's a helpful example to help us see what defining customer categories looks like. If you're Microsoft, your customers fall into maybe 3 categories: home, business, and PC manufacturers who resell computers that have your software on them. And you could further break down those categories into subgroups to get a better understanding of the different segments. For example, home users might break into PC novices, PC experts, and perhaps you want to look at people switching from a Mac as a separate segment and gamers as another segment. Breaking your customers down into these categories is fairly straightforward, but it really isn't the end of the exercise. The second part of this process involves breaking them out by dimensions. Your customers have a variety of characteristics that distinguish them from one another. For example, gender. You most probably have male and female customers. Your customers have different ages. They may live in different geographic areas. They may speak different languages. How many dimensions are there? The list is unlimited. However, most dimensions fall into one of these dimension types. So spend some time considering what are the dimensions within each of these categories that may be relevant to your business. It's easy to generate a very long list. Once you have this information, the next task is to figure out which categories and dimensions are most relevant to your business. What are the dimensions that you use today to influence the way you create your experience for customers? Which dimensions will really drive customer insights? We've generally found that it's best to prioritize to a set of 5 to 10 significant dimensions so you can maintain a balance between depth of insight and being actionable. For example, what you need to do, though, is figure out which ones matter most in your case. For example, gender is a far more important variable when selling lingerie than it is when selling light bulbs or alarm clocks. So let's look at one very simple customer dimension for a wireless carrier. Wireless usage, high, medium, low. Within each dimension, you want to understand really three things. First, what are the values within that dimension that define them? High, medium, low in this case, but what do we mean also by high, medium, and low usage? Get specific. Second, what is different about the buying behavior or decision processes across each of these different values within that dimension? If the answer is not much, then this is probably not a very useful dimension. However, in this case, customers with very high wireless and data usage shop differently for mobile carriers. They prioritize different things, and they look for different types of plans. Therefore, wireless usage is an important dimension, and understanding how to differently influence people depending on where they land on that spectrum is very useful if you're a wireless carrier. At Moving Interactive, we generally will conduct a lot of primary customer research with different types of customers to really be sure we understand the dimensions and the factors that influence each different type of user along that dimension. In some cases, crunching data from transactional or other data warehouse systems can also provide a lot of valuable information and can help you quantify how large each dimension is in terms of the number of customers. Once you have identified the different types of customers that are most relevant for your business by analyzing the different categories and dimensions, the next step is to create personas. For example, if you were a mobile phone company, you might create multiple personas that range from a 20-something who's on a budget plan but who texts constantly to a corporate executive who regularly travels internationally. Each of these fictional characters can have their own story to bring them to life. And these personas make good posters to put on the walls of workspaces where your digital or marketing teams work to keep different customer types that your enterprise serves front and center in their thinking. Once you've created personas, the next step is to determine which of your behavioral sequences from step one apply to each of your personas. And then start to write stories for each of your personas that flesh out the real-world scenarios in which your customer moves through the life cycle of awareness, consideration, purchase, and perhaps support, and then repurchase and advocacy. The initial focus should be on creating your vision for the optimal story, or several optimal stories, for each persona. These stories will ultimately help you get a clearer understanding of your customers, and they will facilitate the product development and product marketing processes. These customer models can be used in many ways to identify new products, determine ways to differentiate existing products, improve the buying process or service processes for different types of customers, and focus your efforts to drive the various business levers that you defined previously. One question we get a lot about customer dimensions, I thought I'd answer it for you here. People often ask, how will we know for a given customer or prospect where they fall on each of the dimensions? The answer to that is twofold. First, you don't necessarily need to know that. One application of customer behavior modeling is to simply make sure that your offering is optimized for the diversity of people who will be accessing it. To keep in mind that you have these different types of customers and that, yes, you may not know which they are when they come to your site or download your app, but that you need to appeal across all these types. But part two is that there often are a variety of techniques you can use to determine or infer what type of customer you are dealing with at any given point in time, and then potentially customize the message or experience based on that knowledge. That is a topic that could easily be its own video, but let me just give you 3 quick examples. The first is to simply leverage the information that is provided digitally for all users. For example, we can easily determine a user's approximate geographic location via geo-IP lookup from the data the browser sends us. Similarly, traffic coming to our site from search engines will have the search terms that the user used to find us passed to us. We can use that search term to potentially segment the user. The second technique is to infer based on browsing activity. For example, if a user is considering visiting a resort and navigates to pages relating to childcare and the age requirements at the resort, it may be reasonable to infer and to tag that user as probably traveling with their family, and that might change the messaging you provide to them. Lastly, you can always ask a user a direct question. For this to be successful, though, you generally have to have a value proposition crafted around what you are asking so that the user has a motivation to respond. But there are many, many ways to do that, and maybe we'll cover that at another time. Okay, we'll wrap up this broad topic here. I hope this has been valuable for you, and I'd encourage you to check out our other thought leadership videos and white papers on our website at movinginteractive.com, or connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any of our other social media touchpoints. And if we at Moving Interactive can be of any help to you in your digital innovation efforts, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Full contact info is on our website, or email us at info@movinginteractive.com, and we'll get right back to you. With that, this is Howard Tiersky, CEO of Moving Interactive. Thanks for watching, and as always, wishing you tremendous success with all your digital innovation.